All right, we've got a bit of a different sort of tack here today, Peter, I think. And I'm going to ask the question, are we sleepwalking into a soft 1984?
Is that a direct question to me in daydreaming?
I think it is in general. But the interesting point also is I was talking to a couple of, say, younger people the other day, and not putting myself, youthful people, and they hadn't actually heard of the book 1984 by George Orwell.
Wow.
And I'm kind of gobsmacked at that. You know,
Have you heard of books?
I was quite incredulous. But the point here is like, I'm kind of looking around me, Peter. I've lived through the 1980s, but as they say, if you can remember the 80s, you probably weren't there, right? But I do remember some parts of the 80s. And when I think about 1984, and I look around, I'm not worried about Big Brother itself. I'm about something quieter, if you like. It's kind of related in many ways, but you know, you hear the stories about couples sitting in the same living room on their devices, not engaging with each other. You get in the elevator in the morning, you know, that you walk in, good morning, and everyone's kind of heads down, you know, looking at their phone. You see that I saw the other day just in Barrel when I was kind of driving in, two teens, probably a 16-year-old girl, 16-year-old boy, only two at the bus stop, standing apart, looking at their phones. And I'm like, back in the day, you would have at least tried to have a conversation.
If you were the man, you would have definitely wanted to have tried.
Sometimes, Peter. But the point here is that, you know, they're not talking, they're not laughing, they're just kind of locked into their own worlds. And that troubles me in many ways because you even see people paying for virtual relationships online. I know we've seen that since the year dot in general, but it's kind of accelerated in terms of that really happening. And I think we're walking into something we've never really bargained for.
Well, I'm looking at this, man, as a cause and effect way, you know, in the sense that people feel this urgency to be online because they feel lonely. And when they're online, they feel lonely because they're not actually really with people. So it's how do we break that sort of vicious cycle where people feel that sort of sense that the only way they can connect with people are through their digital devices. And it's, you know, is that any different? I mean, you talk to me about two couples at a breakfast table, sort of, and each of them on their phones, not talking to one another. But in the old days, one of the man would have probably been reading the newspaper. But it is that. So, is it any different in some ways? What worries me, Matt, is this sense of addiction to these devices.
Yes.
In the sense that do we really have to check our email every 10 minutes or check online every 10 minutes? Can we not do it every 3 hours? Can we not set ourselves some boundaries for its use?
Yeah. I'm absolutely with you, but I do agree on that analogy you're using as well. Is it that different? It's probably not that different.
Yeah.
But when you use that addiction word, I know you've spoken about this on another Boon or Bust session, Pete, you know, in terms of the addictive nature of technology and IT in general, like it's similar to the drug industry.
Yeah.
And we've talked before as well. We know that the algorithms being used on social media are the same that gambling companies use for online gambling. We know that. I've been told that by someone from Aristocrat, big poker machine player. So we know they absolutely doing that on purpose. So it's a little bit different in terms of there is that addictive level. But I'm kind of with you. I mean, the point I think which is very important here is that when you start to lose connection at home, you lose connection on the street, you lose connection, you know, getting in and out of an elevator, that kind of thing as well. You start to really almost kind of diminish your own resilience as well. And you become far more insular. You can't deal with what's happening around you.
But man, I wonder if that's part of the anger we see in the world. You know, this sense of feeling of injustice that people have, and it's fueled by this because you're painting a picture there of a lack of empathy for other people. If we're so absorbed by our devices, we're not paying attention to those people around us who feel that they're neglected, and so we need to. How do we foster the value of the technology that we have? Because it is valuable. It is changing our world. It is enhancing how we do things. How do we foster that and cultivate that, but also maintain that human element on it? You know, and I mean, I don't think I have the answers to it, but I think it needs some sort of discipline. And discipline's a word that people won't like, but it's some sort of how do we manage our use of these devices? How do we set ourselves guardrails for them?
It's too late.
So are we lost? Are we lost?
It's too late. I don't think we're lost. I mean, I think we can go back to one thing we talked about before, the kind of social media ban for under 16s, for example. that's potentially that's a step in the right direction. Yeah. But then again, we're then penalising one part of society when we're probably more guilty than most.
We should be setting examples of the older people.
We should be. So I think that, I don't know, what is the answer? I mean, we can all say collectively, right, I'm never going to look at my phone more than 3 times a day, but then that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So that comes back to my point, is that it's probably too late. And I don't have an answer. I think that, and again, coming back to the whole kind of 1984 analogy, the whole thing with Big Brother is watching you, was the premise of the book, and obviously the movie as well, was that they were, Big Brother was collecting all this information about you and watching everything you're doing, almost without you knowing, but really getting that sense of all about you. But George Orwell never would have imagined a 1984 where we give them the information freely, right, at the end of the day.
But there's that delightful term I like, surveillance capitalism, where people are actually absorbing what you're doing and pushing it back to you, and you're giving it to them voluntarily. Yep. You go to sort of Coles and you check out, and do you want to put your flybys in? Well, they're not using that data just to give you a free ticket to Melbourne once every year. They're actually sort of using it to say, how can we target you with what you're buying,
of course,
to make sure we get more out of your wallet?
Absolutely, that's right. So that's what it's all about. It's the same with the e-bikes. When you drive around on these rented e-bikes, they're not making the money from renting the bike. They're making the money from the information they're getting about you riding that bike and where you're going and what you're doing and all that kind of stuff.
Well, I think, Matt, the one thing in this is, though, that I think we've got to stop being so beholden to the technology. I mean, I don't want to bite the hand that feeds me. I've made my life out of technology, but I do think we've got to make sure that they don't just get a free rein at everything. There's got to be something that they put back into our communities,
There has to be. And again, talking to a young woman the other day about this in general, and she was saying to me, she actually wishes we could go back, maybe 10 years, like before all of this. And this is someone in their 30s, right? So it's not
30s, okay.
not a curmudgeon like you and I, for example. But so maybe that there's this growing resistance, Peter, within some segments of society where they are going to start pushing back. There's too much noise filling our heads. There's too much friction. Talk about friction maximum. There's too much friction going on in our not in our necessarily in our lives, but in our virtual lives. With angst. You're on the phone and you're looking at this and you're getting slop thrown at you all over the place. I see something which I know is obviously AI generated. I won't even look at it. And you used this quote the other day, Peter, where he said, from Tim Duggan, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
In Morning Herald, where he said, if you haven't got the time to write something, why expect I've got the time to read it?
Yeah.
And that's very true.
That's right. But I do think this is such a fluid area for us. And I'm glad to hear there is some pushback. I mean, I despair when you're coming in on a public transport. Nobody's reading a book.
No.
And yet books are beautiful things for us. They grow our minds. They expand us. They give us new ideas. And I worry that by spending too much time on a social platforms and being on our devices, we're actually losing that human connection. Mm-hmm. And I think we've got to sort of set the examples for people to show them that there's more of the world than your device.
Yep. Well, to your point, I remember I was I was on the train into Sydney, probably, must be 2 or 3 years ago now, going over the Harbour Bridge. And I was looking around, everyone on their phone, and I kind of looked up, and I sort of looked up not on the train, but what was on outside, the Harbour Bridge, the Opera House, the Sun. I got out, then I ended up at the QEB. I looked up and there's all this amazing sort of work on the top of the QEB, which most people haven't said. So I wrote this LinkedIn missive. Yeah. Just look up.
Yes.
Because we're missing so much that's going on around us at the moment as we are engrossed and captivated and addicted to what is ultimately a lot of slop in front of us.
Yeah, but Matt, is the genie out of the bottle? Can we put the genie back? I mean, it's a fact of our life, but I do think it is actually recognizing, setting boundaries for what you want to do and actually finding activities outside devices. What happened to hobbies? What happened to sort of social clubs? What happened to belonging to sports teams? All of these things widen your circle, and we've got to encourage people to do more in this area.
We do.